Perfect. Cool. So thank you guys for showing up. Richard Rich K was very accepting to share a little bit about his company and 5 strategies on what to learn about setting how much your customers are willing to pay. It's a very interesting topic on that because, you know, setting your pricing level just at Keystone doesn't always work. And with Richard's platform, Leaflet, it seems like a pretty interesting platform that allows you to kind of understand where to set your pricing. And so with that, Richard basically had a startup prior to this, which he sold to LegalZoom, and now has started his newest one. And I think Richard, you know, take it away. Tell us a little bit about you, your bio, go deeper, and then let's hit your, share your slides.
Sounds good. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen.
Awesome.
And can everyone see my screen? Is this good?
Yes.
Cool. So this the title of the talk is 5 strategies to figure out what your customers are willing to pay. And as Andrew said, I am one of the co-founders of a company called Leaflet. Why am I here talking to you about the pricing? What qualifies me to talk about this? I've been working in pricing actually for about a decade, just pricing. Originally, I had this company in the consumer legal industry, but it was also a pricing company. And I was able to grow that company to a reasonable degree, some amount of success. So as Andrew had mentioned, that was acquired by LegalZoom. And I worked there as an executive for a little while, and then went out on my own again to start another company, which grew into Leaflet. So one of the things that motivated me to come into e-commerce, coming from the legal industry, is that everything in e-com is sort of inherently measured or measurable. There's a lot in the legal industry that is much harder to measure, like, the degree of confidence with which one attorney might speak in front of the judge. It's hard to quantify that confidence. How does someone's suit make them look? Things like that actually can have an impact on legal results, but they're very hard to measure, and they're therefore very hard to quantify or work with. By contrast, in e-com, what's wonderful is everything is digital, everything is easily measured, everything therefore can theoretically be optimized. So I took sort of what I had learned about pricing and startups and sort of made a jump over to an area that I thought would be a little more fertile. So that's how I got into e-commerce, but still focusing on the pricing angle. And then my background before starting that first company was in economics and law. So that's a little bit about me. And I'm happy to elaborate about my journey, how I got here in the Q&A to the extent anyone has any questions. But I'm going to jump right into the content that I prepared to speak about, which is these 5 strategies, or you could think of them as 5 tips, pro tips, pieces of good advice. I should just mention, I guess, going back to this, my company Leaflet, we do specialize in price optimization for e-commerce. This talk is not going to be a sales pitch for Leaflet. I made a decided decision not to do that, so that's not what this is going to be. If anyone is interested in getting into more specifics, you can reach me afterwards, but this is not going to be a sales pitch. This is going to be me sharing 5 pieces of good advice or wisdom for you that I've learned from doing pricing in multiple industries over a decade. And the first of them is that you need to have a plan for price testing. A plan is not a series of responses that you make along the way as you learn things. A plan is something that you prepare in advance before you set out to learn. A plan is work you do in preparation for your price testing. And it's very important to not only go through that planning exercise, but also to really to commit that plan to paper or digital storage medium, whatever the case may be. And in that plan, one of the first things you need to do is articulate what are your hypotheses. What are the things about the world that you believe to be true that you want to either validate or invalidate? What do you want to learn? You can't just set out to learn in general. You need to set out to learn something specific. And so once you've identified what are your hypotheses, what do you want to learn, the next thing you're going to have to do is decide what methodology you will use to test your hypotheses. And why are you using that methodology? I encourage anyone who's serious about price testing to explicitly articulate what is the methodology we're going to use and why. We'll come back to that one in a minute. But the next thing is, obviously, regardless of what methodology you're going to use, what tools will you need in order to carry out that testing? And where are you going to get them? What are they going to cost? Who in your company will be responsible for carrying out that price testing? Everyone has organizations that are of different scales. Some people are running one-man operations. Other people have, colleagues, teammates, employees maybe. But the point is, prices don't test themselves. And in order to have a robust plan that can actually be executed, there needs to be someone in your organization that can take responsibility for price testing. And so that person needs to be designated in advance as part of developing a price testing plan. And then finally, you need to have a sober assessment about how much time it's going to take from that person. Is this a 1 hour a week commitment? Is it a 10-hour a week commitment? And that whoever is responsible for it in your company is going to need to be fully on board and understand that this is something they need to run with. Anyway, as I said, we would come back to the methodology question. Broadly speaking, there are two ways you can do price testing for e-com. One is called split testing, and then the other is called longitudinal testing. Most people are familiar with the concept of split testing, but I'll just explain it anyway. Split testing is when you're running two or more different experiences in parallel at the exact same time, and you're serving those different experiences to different segments of your traffic that have been randomly decided. That's split testing. And then in split testing, you're comparing the results of different groups, different segments of your traffic that have had these different experiences. Longitudinal testing, fewer people are familiar with that term, although the concept is pretty simple. In essence, longitudinal means over time. So longitudinal testing means that you're not dividing your traffic into groups. You're introducing changes over time, and you're comparing the results of different periods of time rather than testing different experiences all at once and comparing the results of different segments of your traffic. That's the difference between split testing and longitudinal testing. So when I say what methodology will you use, that's really what I mean. And I'm stressing this because I think it's a very important concept in order to have a plan for price testing that will actually really be workable for your company. Meaning everyone has different circumstances, different priorities, values, and depending on what circumstances you are in and what are your priorities, one methodology may be better for you than the other. So just to highlight a couple of the things to be thinking about, some of the considerations that you should be giving thought to are, number one, would it be a problem for you in your situation if your customers found out that you were testing your prices in general, split testing your prices in particular? Would that be inconsistent with your brand promise, let's say? If so, then maybe split testing is not a good methodology for you. Another question you should ask yourself is, are you going to be selling into the European market? If so, there may be some regulatory issues with split testing your prices for Europeans. Another question to ask yourself is, Are you selling through other sales channels outside of your website? For example, Google Shopping, shoppable Instagram. If so, potentially split testing is not the right methodology for you. So there's a variety of factors like that that are important to think through in order to find a methodology that will actually be suitable for the circumstances of your business, let's say. I'm not going to dwell on that, but that's what I meant when I said what methodology will you use to test and why. If anyone is interested in the other types of considerations that you could give thought to, I'm happy to speak about this in greater length during the Q&A. But just to sort of summarize this whole first point, you need to have a well-developed plan for your price testing, and that's something you need to prepare in advance of actually getting going. All right, I'm going to move on to number 2. Appreciate the role of context. Pricing has context. The first aspect of that context that I'm going to highlight is, in my shorthand, no silo. What I mean by that is that your pricing is not siloed off. It doesn't live in a siloed off fashion. Pricing is not something that lives, or if you think about this organizationally, pricing does not live within your website, underneath your website. Pricing is something that lives beyond your website. Pricing is something that transcends your website. Your pricing is not siloed off. That's what I mean. Your pricing is something that exists across a network of connected systems, most often, and interacts across those systems and flows between those systems. That's an important part of the context when you're thinking about testing your prices. So given that your pricing lives beyond your website, it's really advisable for your testing to live beyond your website also. Your testing needs to take into account the system in which your pricing operates. That's point number 1 about context. Point number 2 about context is the concept of cross-elasticity of demand. That's the idea that obviously, if your price goes up, all things being equal, you'd expect your demand for that product to go down, and vice versa. Price goes down, you'd expect demand to go up. That's just called elasticity of demand. Cross-elasticity of demand is the idea that when I change the price on product A, it can actually impact demand on product B, and maybe product C and product D. That's the idea of cross-elasticity of demand. It's a very real thing. To give a simple example, imagine you sell more than one type of red t-shirt, and you decide you want to raise your price on one of your red t-shirts. Well, by comparison, that makes the other red t-shirt look more affordable relatively. So you may expect that there would be more demand for the red t-shirt that hasn't had its price increased. That's just a simple example. But the actual degree of linkage, of interactivity between products will vary from product pair to product pair. But like I said, it's a very real phenomenon. And that phenomenon has implications for how you should understand your price testing, to the extent you're doing price testing, to the extent you have a broad product catalog. I know some people have single product stores. If you have a single product store, cross-elasticity of demand is not as much something you need to worry about. But if you do have a broader product catalog, then you need to be aware that when you're evaluating the results of a test on one product, you may need to look beyond the data simply on that one product to understand the true impact of your price test because of cross-elasticity of demand. So that's another important point about context. And then the last point about context is seasonality. And when I say seasonality, I don't mean simply, is it fall, is it spring? I mean that the world around us is constantly changing. Literally things like war and peace, drought and plenty, disease and health, current events, foreign exchange rates, consumer trends, new competitors entering your industry, old competitors dying out. The world is constantly changing, and therefore the optimal price is frequently changing as well. for like I said, reasons that have nothing to do with changes in the actual seasons themselves. That too, obviously. Anyway, so the point here is that, there's too much information swirling around us for anyone to really make sense of all of it. But the point about seasonality is that you should think of your efforts with price testing not so much as trying to identify that one right best price that's right now and right forever. That's what you call a deterministic conclusion. Like you're trying to find the right answer. You should not think deterministically. You should be rather trying to set your pricing policy up so that it is maximally responsive to changes in the world around you. So I can elaborate on that in the Q&A to the extent anyone's interested. But this is just to summarize the idea that you have to be mindful of context when you are proposing to test your prices. Number 3 is account for all of your costs to the extent possible. A lot of entrepreneurs are very aware of their top line, but not really so focused on keeping track of their expenses, particularly their variable expenses. So everything here is an example of a variable expense. Just to name a few, this is not an exhaustive list. You have your inventory costs, which is your costs from your suppliers to either source your inventory or to source the raw materials that you use to make the inventory. If you're in the latter category, then you need to be adding in a cost for labor also. But let's just leave it simple model for now. Inventory costs. Then you have storage costs, depending on how your business is set up. Maybe not if you're drop shipping or doing print on demand. But if you're housing inventory, either in a third-party service or on your own, there is a cost to storing inventory. And then in addition to that, depending on what it is you sell, there may be some kind of built-in deterioration rate in terms of the value of your inventory. So it's ideal to take into account that as well, because that's a form of cost. In addition to that, you have your shipping costs, and obviously your cost to acquire a customer, that's advertising or affiliate fees. And it's good to point out that some of these costs can really be different from product variant to product variant. You have your small, medium, and large, which maybe take up different amounts of space and therefore different storage costs. Maybe some version of your product requires refrigeration and another doesn't. So the more detailed you can be with all these costs down to the variant level, the more accurately you'll be able to test your true profitability at different prices. Obviously, you cannot optimize what you cannot measure, and costs are one side of a two-sided equation, right? So to the extent possible, be mindful of all of your costs in a detailed fashion. Suggestion number 4 is run the tests that matter most. What do I mean by that? So the first bullet here, it says sparsely populated matrix. I want everyone to think of a grid where on the x-axis, it is a list of all of your products that you sell. And on the y-axis is a list of all of the possible prices that all of those products could be sold at. And there's some point where each product meets each potential price. And if you were to fill in that intersection between product and potential price, fill in whatever data you have from your historical experience of selling that product at that price, then you'd be filling in this grid. And the question is, how many of those cells would actually be filled in? For how many of those product price combinations would you actually have historical data about what happens when I try to sell the product at that price? Maybe what you're filling in at those cells is either, the number of units you sold at that price, the amount of profit you generated when selling that product at that price, but some kind of way of representing what your historical experience has been when actually selling that product at that price. If you were to actually do that, for most merchants, the result would be what we call a sparsely populated matrix, meaning that most of the cells in that table would be empty. because for most businesses, it is true that most products have only been sold at a couple of price points. Most prices, in other words, have not been tried, which is why you would have a sparsely populated matrix. The relevance of that is the more densely populated your matrix would be, the easier and faster it is to determine what is really the best price, the most profitable price for you to be using. So the time it takes to go from having a sparsely populated matrix to a densely populated matrix is more or less the time that it will take you to achieve efficient pricing. And another concept to invoke here is the trade-off between exploration and exploitation. Whenever you're trying to improve something through iterative testing, you have to be willing to take risks in order to realize rewards. Exploration versus exploitation. You have to explore in order to search for the possibility of a superior outcome. But when you go out exploring, it's possible that what you're going to find is not a superior outcome, but rather an inferior outcome. So the true cost of testing is rarely the cost of whatever software you're using. It's rarely the labor cost of whoever on your team is responsible for carrying out your program of price testing. The true cost of price testing rather is the sum of all inferior outcomes that you might encounter along the way in the pursuit of achieving superior outcomes. Or put differently, the true cost of price testing is the sum of all missed opportunities to charge a better price, a more efficient price, a more profitable price. That's the real source of cost in price testing. And therefore, the cost of your price testing will be determined by which tests you choose to run and the order that you choose to run them in. So that's why my advice or strategy number 4 is run the tests that matter most. I mean, the devil is in the details. I'm saying this in a very simple way. It's not such a simple thing to actually do, but it's a very important point to understand because there's so many products and prices you could test. Practically speaking, no one has time to run all possible tests, so you're going to have to make some choices, and those choices that you make bear a direct impact on how long it takes you to achieve efficient pricing and how efficient that pricing will become and what will be the cost of the journey along the way. Enough said about point number 4. Point number 5 is prepare to answer customers' questions, because there is a very good likelihood, regardless of what methodology you ultimately choose, there is a good likelihood that you will encounter questions from your customers. So better to be prepared. And the first way that I recommend for being prepared is by testing at the appropriate pace. Questions to ask yourself include, does my business have a high rate of repeat purchase? Is there a high degree of community built around my brand? If you answer yes to either of those questions, then probably you should not be testing new prices at a daily clip or at a weekly clip. Probably you should be thinking about introducing price changes at a monthly clip or at a quarterly clip. Similarly, if there's a high degree of repeat purchase or a lot of community built around your brand, then I would suggest that you do not test large intervals like 20% changes. Rather, you should be looking at smaller intervals, more on the order of magnitude of 2% changes. That's what I mean by testing at the appropriate pace. And obviously, everything I said, the opposite is true in the case of a business that has a low degree of repeat purchase or not a lot of community built up around the brand. So test at the pace that makes sense for your circumstances. That's one of the best ways of being prepared to answer customer questions, is by managing the likelihood of those questions occurring in the first place. The next piece of advice would be to be ready with a policy. If a customer comes to you and says, hey, I bought this product yesterday and now I notice it's selling for some dollars less, can I have a partial refund? You need to be ready with a policy for how to handle that situation. and that policy needs to be well thought through, and it needs to be socialized with everyone in your organization. And everyone needs to be prepared to explain that policy, not only the policy, but the underlying price change that gave rise to a discussion about the policy. Everyone in your organization needs to be able to explain that with confidence. Why did the prices change? What are our policies about how to handle situations like this? Everyone, particularly those on the front lines, customer support, customer success, needs to be prepared to speak to that with confidence. So that's what I would recommend to you in terms of being prepared to answer customer questions. Just to recap, my 5 pieces of advice for you are: develop a thorough plan in advance for your price testing. Appreciate the role of context in designing your testing, in understanding your test results. Account for all of your costs as detailed as possible. Run the tests that matter the most, although the devil is in the details. And be prepared to answer customer questions. So those are my 5 pieces of advice that I wanted to share with everyone. I'm going to reserve the balance of my time to take questions or to expand on any of the topics that I sort of brought up at a high level in the organized remarks. And I will turn it back over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Richard. That was awesome. That was highly engaging. My hand hurts from writing all the stuff on here. Most people think pricing is really something just as a simple kind of matter, right? But it's really not. Like when you think about it and you break it down like how you broke it down, it's really not. I mean, I think that the question that, if you have the amount of volume, say like as an Amazon or Nike or things like that, I guess you can get results a lot quicker, right? If you are a smaller seller that doesn't have that much traffic, that much things, what is an optimal kind of like, the way to start testing pricing? I mean, if you only have like 1 or 2 SKUs and maybe you get 10,000 visitors a month, is that enough? Can you start if you have only 2,000 visitors a month? I mean, what optimally is where you see the best use of like using your product and testing variables of pricing?
Sure. I will answer that question, although, like I said, I didn't want to give a sales pitch for my product, so
Sure.
I'm going to answer it with that in mind.
Okay.
Whether you're using our product or any other kind of product to do price testing, whether you're just going in on your own, I would say that there is some kind of a theoretical minimum of amount of activity that you need to have in order for price testing to make sense, just to be practical. It's probably not as much as most people would think, and it's not going to be measured in volume of traffic. It's going to be measured in volume of orders.
Yeah.
And the activity level that's required is going to be proportionate to the width of your product catalog. Meaning if you have 2 orders a day and you only sell 5 products, that's different than if you have 2 orders a day and 100 products.
Mm.
The store with 100 products probably doesn't have enough activity to justify price testing. But if you're selling 2 orders a day and you only have 5 products, maybe that's enough. Sure. So that's one thing to be aware of. And then the other thing to be aware of is that independent of, so we see this situation a lot where someone will have a collection of products, let's say shirts, and within any given product in that collection, they don't have enough transactional volume on that product to justify price testing, but across the entire collection, they do have enough volume. Mm. And so one strategy is to bundle all those products together into one test and run them as one test. That way you're leveraging all that volume. So there are different things that you can do like that to work to sort of stretch the limits of what's possible.
Sure.
But definitely I would say as a rule of thumb, if you're doing less than $25,000 a month of revenue, probably you have bigger fish to fry than price testing.
Okay. Sounds good. And then on that matrix that you were talking about, that was kind of interesting. So on the X and Y, the ability to, so on the Y-axis, you might be setting a price at, say, $1, $1.25, $1.50, $2, all the way up to $2, right? And then on the X-axis, you've got, you know, shirt A, shirt B, shirt C, D, E, and F, right? And then you're just saying with the tool or any tool to be able to, over the course, depending on how, you know, you want to do that, you're testing that $1, how many sales did you get on that? $1.25, how many sales you got on that? And then that gives you that sort of price elasticity, I guess, or that the of where you'll come to saying, okay, here is the optimal price of where we're having sales and the price, and that's kind of our XY, and it meets in the middle, and that's our optimal price. Is that kind of how that would work?
Yeah, that is how that works. In other words, what we do is not magic.
Right.
All we're really doing is measuring elasticity of your products and taking into account your costs. And between costs and elasticity, you can pretty much figure out what is the price for any given product that will maximize your expected profit. And the point about that whole sparsely populated matrix point was just that if you have, let's say for a given product, if you've only ever sold it at one price point, then most of the potential prices for that product have been unexplored. And so you're going to have to collect data about what happens when we try this price, what happens when you try that price, and all that takes time, and there's opportunity cost. So the more densely populated the matrix is already, the easier and faster it is to just identify what is the best price.
Right. Yeah, it kind of brings me back to when you're doing email testing. So you can test discounts at 10%, 15, and 20, just, you know, higher level kind of stuff. But if you find that you're getting a lot of sales at, say, the 15, why would you want to do a 20% discount if you're, you know, and so I think it's kind of that same thing here on the opposite side of like, what is the most money you can get? And you think you're going to sell it for $3, but really the market really will only demand $2.55 or something like that, right? And I think that's the key to it.
Absolutely. But you also have to be prepared to explore the other direction, like setting discounts aside. You have to be prepared to ask, like, would I gain more in volume by lowering the price than I would lose in margin?
Right. And then that volume that you get, then you can say, go back to your wholesaler and say, hey, look, I'm going to order 10,000 units rather than 5. So you're making it on the back end rather on the front end. So you end up actually, you know, coming out in the wash ahead, I guess, right? Or with more profit margin, more
Absolutely. You make a great point, which is that the wins that you can achieve through price testing have cascading benefits in other areas of your business. As an example, if you find through testing that you can command a higher price on your product, well, that means that you can afford to bid more when you're in competitive auctions for advertising. You can afford to bid more for Facebook ads. You can afford to buy more traffic because you have a higher price point. As a result, you can get whatever. You get the idea. There's cascading benefits.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a very fascinating thing on that. I'll open it up to the floor. I don't want to captivate all the stuff. Whoever else has questions, I have a lot more, but I'll let everybody else speak. Anybody have questions?
Richard, I had asked Andrew for the link. So for it's Shopify that your company's product connects to.
That's correct. Yeah.
What is your? I guess how many different stores are using this? How many I guess different installs do you have?
I just went ahead and shared the link with in the chat. Yeah, like I said, not trying to make a sales pitch for my product, just trying to share some knowledge.
Oh, yeah.
But since you're asking, we have several hundred installs.
And they range from, you know, well-known brands down to, you know, just smaller Shopify stores.
Yep, we have everyone along the spectrum. in countries all around the world selling everything you can possibly imagine, from art to car parts.
Okay. Interesting.
So, so that brings up a question on things. So, in terms of setting this up, I mean, it seems, I mean, it could be daunting to some people if they are like a 1 or 2 man shop. I mean, so you guys offer sort of customization on that. Is that correct, in terms of making sure and running the types of tests that you would need? So you kind of walk people through that whole process and making sure that they have optimal results?
Yeah, we do not simply provide a set of tools and say good luck. I
Right.
hope you're successful. We provide tools and then very personalized, high touch hand holding.
Okay.
Our goal is, if you want to just use the tools on your own, great. If you want us to really manage everything for you, we can do that as well. Our goal is to meet the company where they are. And to your point, there are people who are, one-man shops that really need that additional hand-holding, coaching, bandwidth, you name it. And that's exactly what we are here to provide.
Okay. Yeah. And so, you were talking about, I'm just looking at my notes. So you were talking about the ability to set a policy, right? So, somebody comes in and they buy a helmet, just say a bike helmet, and it was it was $95 on Tuesday. And then, because you're testing this, it was, $85 the next thing. So, do a lot of merchants that you deal with, when they do this kind of pricing, don't have policies set up, and they don't know how to respond to customers? And this is why you're saying think ahead, think of more going forward on things?
It does happen, yes.
Okay. That's interesting. And then the setting of the pace, like you were saying, I mean, obviously it depends on the different types of industry you're in there, but I mean, single product, you're saying you can kind of go more than, say, a 2% type of thing with multiple sort of other products, keep it under.
Here's what I was saying, is that some businesses have high degree of repeat purchase, others not so much.
Okay.
Like let's say an online vitamin shop,
Right.
where you want the person to be buying your vitamins over and over again.
Okay.
Such a business, and I'm giving you a real world, scenario.
Right.
Such a business may be reluctant to test prices more frequently than once a quarter, because there's a high degree of repeat purchase.
Mm-hmm.
They may also, in addition to wanting to test prices only once a quarter, they may only want to test change increments of 1 or 2% here or there, rather than wider increments. Other stores that are selling, let's say, electronics, that are not trying to do a lot of repeat purchase, they may test 20% movements one way or the other, because they're not expecting to have as much of a relationship with the customer, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So what was really interesting was in the EU. So does the EU not allow for price testing? Like, it's set and that's the price you got to offer, and we do not allow for that kind of stuff? Is that what happens?
Sure. So even though I do have a legal background, I'm just going to say that it's not legal advice and you should consult your own attorney. But the EU does have the GDPR, and the GDPR does require that you disclose when you're using cookies and what you're using them for. And so if your methodology for price testing involves cookies, then you probably, in order to do it lawfully in the EU, you probably need to have a reasonably conspicuous disclosure that says we are using cookies to test pricing on you. And that's something that I know a lot of merchants are not excited about doing. So like I said, I'm not giving legal advice. It may be that even with the disclosure, it's not lawful in the EU, but I'm pretty confident that without a disclosure, that under GDPR, if you are using cookies, that would not be lawful.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I want to, there's another thing I wanted to ask you about. So if you have different channels that you're testing on, so like you were talking about Facebook and Instagram, and say you're doing Google, think store. How do you test for that? Like, is it only your website that you really be able to test this stuff, or like, what is the best way to go about that? I mean, I know because is it just not, you can't like count the metrics of that coming in because you've got so many different variables?
So the reason, okay, so the problem with the different sales channels is more of a problem with split testing as a methodology.
Okay.
Because the split test is only going to operate on your website.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
With longitudinal testing, it's not really an issue because longitudinal testing is one price at a time. You have one price on your Google Shopping. You have one price in your shoppable Instagram. What is that price going to be right now?
Right.
So with longitudinal testing, it's not an issue. So that's why I raised it as something for people to consider when deciding what methodology is right for them. Does your business involve third-party sales channels? And it doesn't necessarily need to involve a sales channel where where people are transacting. For example, With Google Shopping, you can have it set up so that your products will show up in Google search results. But if the visitor clicks on your product, they'll be taken to your website. So there's no transaction happening off your site there, but nonetheless, your pricing is nonetheless being shown outside of your website. Same with shoppable Instagram. They're not transacting on Instagram, but they are seeing your prices on Instagram. So that's one of the significant benefits of the longitudinal approach, is that it's very, very easy to test on an omni-channel basis.
Interesting. Yeah, because I would assume that once you figure out that optimal pricing, then you're putting it on those different channels at that price, and probably would increase, I guess, or try. Interesting. Yeah, and then the seasonality thing was quite interesting in terms of, like, most people like think fall, winter, summer, but you're thinking seasonality is completely different than that, which is something I didn't even think about that, because it's just like you're informed with that seasonality kind of thing. So, hot weather, cold weather, different types of, if there's drought type things. I mean, that's very interesting kinds of ways of thinking about that. Like, how would you test on that? Like, how would you price test that type of stuff?
So the way that we deal with that is by having as I mentioned this word earlier in the talk, having a non-deterministic approach. Deterministic means we're trying to narrow in on the right price, and once we find the right price, we're going to stick with it forever. So, but by contrast with the approach we take, it's non-deterministic, meaning even once we figure out what we believe to be the right price, we're going to continue to have little variations here and there, and seeing how those variations produce changes now, as opposed to how similar variations did, a week ago, a month ago, when maybe there was no drought. That is how we deal with the changing world around us, is by having a non-stationary outcome.
Okay.
Put differently, our AI doesn't actually know that a drought happened.
Sure.
But our AI is sensitive to how results change based on different prices. And because it's non-stationary, if there is a new drought or a new competitor or whatever it is that's impacting, the outcome, that will show up in the testing.
Right. And that's an interesting point, like the new competitor, right? So a new competitor comes into your world, and you've had all these great sales, and all of a sudden you start seeing in your analytics a drop of 20%, right, or 50% or 30%, and nothing else has changed other than, you still see your search volume the same. then then I guess you would somehow find out, or is there ways to like know that competitors have come into your market space, or is it like how would you kind of track that backwards to see what's gone on with the price?
So just like how our AI doesn't actually know that a drought is occurring, but it sees that things are responding differently now than they used to.
Right.
So too, we don't know that you have a new competitor, but we
Right.
see that people are not responding to these prices the way that they
Okay. Okay.
it's a very human, pardon me for saying this, it's a very human instinct to want to know why
Right.
something is happening,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't necessarily need to know why something is happening in order to identify that it is happening.
Right. 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 Yeah, no, I mean, if you don't have some sort of tool like yours to sort of price test and be able to set these experiments up, you are leaving money on the table, or, sales on the table, however you want to look at it, with that. And I think in today's competitive market, I mean, it's what Amazon does. I mean, there's all those people setting, bid prices automatically, like, hey, it's a auto repricer type of things, just because if somebody's bidding here, you're going to bid down, and to your point. But this is a much better way to really determine the right selling price for that right item. So, you see this where they have an extra large shirt and a large shirt, and it might be $1 more, but why is it $1 more? Because I mean, the material is probably not that much more. So why not try even pricing rather than, incrementally increasing the price for a large, small, extra small type of thing?
Definitely.
Which is quite interesting. Cool. John, did you have a question?
No, I have to review the presentation again because there's a lot of good stuff in there. Where I deal with a lot of Amazon sellers, a lot of e-com sellers talking about pricing, as you said, is probably the last thing that they worry about. And it's one of those things where you are leaving money on the table if you truly don't understand your pricing model, and what you can what your elasticity is for pricing your products to the amount of sales that you can get from it. So yeah, fascinating to hear this, and then thinking in terms of how people can use it, how companies can use it. At some point, I was working with a company who what they do for larger businesses, and this was more offline, is that they run tests to see even before the pricing or whatever, to see if the price that they can present is something that their subset of users would buy. And what they were giving was market intelligence. So and it's kind of coming back to me a little more. But even before they went and they bought something or purchased the inventory for it, they could go out and do pre-testing on price, on for profit, for other purposes, to understand the full boat of it. But obviously price, because if you don't have the right price, you're not getting a profit, and it's not worth their time to carry that product or even make the product. So this kind of is interesting in the spectrum of where you're doing this, which is real time on your store, as well as that it is very succinct with pricing, and then that also goes into number of units you might sell, to what does your inventory look like, what is your all the other conditions that you need to understand for that for the answers from your pricing. So
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
Certainly.
cool. Anybody else have questions? Guess not. So Richard, where is the best place for people to reach out to you and get a hold of you if they want to use your services
Sure.
or learn
I
more?
will put my email in the chat.
Okay.
You're welcome to email me. It's richard@leaflet.co. That's CO. And I'm happy to answer any questions about pricing or Shopify or entrepreneurship or whatever anyone else wants to talk about.
Yeah. Plus you're a lawyer, or an ex-lawyer or still a lawyer. Do you still practice law?
I never actually practiced law, to be honest.
Okay. Okay. So don't get his legal advice.
No,
Just
not getting legal advice.
Cool. Well, awesome. This is really, really informative. I mean, thank you so much for sharing. I hope everybody got a lot out of that. We will put the show notes up as well as all Richard's contact information. So along with the video. So if you want to listen or go back, I definitely highly recommend you do it because there was a lot of data that was given out and some really interesting things. So thank you for Richard for coming on and sharing with us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Great. Thanks so much. Take care, guys. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.